Hi, I'm Nicole Ferraro, and this is The Divide, a podcast from Light Reading exploring the ongoing digital divide, why and where it still exists, and what needs to be done to get people everywhere connected to reliable, high speed internet. Today, we're talking with New Street research policy analyst Blair Levin all about the BEAD program. With final proposals for the federal government's BEAD program officially due to the NTIA on September 4th, with some exceptions, we discuss the technology breakdown of the winners so far and how the Trump administration's revised rules for the program impacted the outcome. We also get into next steps for BEAD as the NTIA reviews those final proposals, what may come of the program's non-deployment funds, how far this version of BEAD can go toward addressing the digital divide in the U.S., and much more. Blair, welcome back to the podcast. So great to see you. How's it going?
Great. Summer was wonderful. I hope your summer was great too, and great to see you.
Thank you. It was good enough. Still summer-ish outside, which I could do without, but we're rocking and rolling here. And we are here today to talk about the BEAD program, formerly known as the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program. I'm not sure all those words are relevant anymore, so we'll just go with BEAD. So you and I are catching up a few days after the deadline for states and territories to submit their final BEAD proposals to the NTIA. Roughly 20 states were granted short-term extensions, but the majority have submitted their proposals and they named their BEAD grant winners preliminarily. The NTIA is claiming that through this revised version, the benefit of the bargain version of BEAD, that states are saving taxpayers roughly $13 billion, which we'll revisit that in a little bit.
I would just note that if you're thinking about buying a brand new Mercedes and you instead buy a junky 40-year-old Chevy, you can claim you saved a lot of money. I'm not sure that's the way it's going to work out, but.
Yeah, that's a great way to kick off this conversation and a nice way to set the tone. Yeah. So with that in mind, I'd love to just get a high-level overview from you on the results so far in terms of the technology breakdown, as well as who some of the big ISP winners are at this point. Of course, understanding that the NTIA can still approve or deny those winners, and whether any results have surprised you. I'll turn it over to you just for a high-level take to start us off.
So the high-level take is, number one, by doing what they did, they successfully delayed any implementation by at least 6 months and more likely by a year. That is to say, we already had some states that were done, and all the states were ready to be done in the second quarter of this year. Everybody got moved back at least 6 months. And like I said, in some states, it's going to be significantly greater. The second thing I would note is the NTIA emphasized the concept of tech neutrality as the fundamental principle to justify what they were doing. When the new rules first came out, I said, well, it looks to me like there's going to be a big shift to satellite. A couple weeks later, after talking to a bunch of states, I then pointed out that the states noted that in the law, there's something called the priority broadband service. Yeah. And whereas Ludnick seemed to be saying all technologies should compete with each other on equal terms in which cost is really the only factor, what happened was lots of states, particularly in the Southeast and Northeast, basically said the only thing that qualifies as a priority broadband project is fiber or wireline. And therefore, they're not competing for cost against fixed wireless or LEOs. But it turned out the far more significant thing that NTIA did was to signal to the states, we're going to put a cap on a per location or an average cost per location. And so by lowering that amount from what it had been under Biden, and under neither Biden nor NTIA did the federal government actually say it publicly, here's the number. Yeah. But NTIA clearly signaled to a bunch of states. In the Western states, we'll talk about that in a second, the number is a little bit higher, but in the other states, it's lower. So Western states, about 15,000, I think. Other states, it's about 8,000, I think. But the point is, the 13 million in savings is really because it's the average cost per location. And then if you say that's a cap, what you do instead of saying we're going to have wireless guys and satellite guys compete with wired, rather it's wired guys who can beat that cap, they get the money. But then after that, it's going to go to either fixed wireless or LEO. And that's what we saw in a lot of states. West Virginia went from 99% fiber to like 94% fiber or something like that. Louisiana went, I think, order of magnitude 96 to 84 fiber. So satellite didn't get as much as I'm sure Musk was hoping for, and as some people initially predicted, but they got a lot more than they would have gotten under the Biden rules. And I think what you have to say is, yeah, they saved taxpayers $13 billion. Again, we'll figure out what the use of that money is. We'll talk about that later. But the question is, what is the quality of the service? There will be literally thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, haven't done the math yet, of people who would have gotten a wireline connection. Now they'll be getting a satellite connection.
Yeah.
That absolutely saves taxpayers money in a way. But is that really what this purpose is about as we move into an era of AI and things like that, where connectivity becomes even more important and the need for fast bits becomes more important?
Yeah. And as you say, the majority of the locations still got fiber allocated to them. But in terms of, by provider itself, it looks like SpaceX and Amazon top out as the top two ISPs.
In terms of number of
locations,
Correct.
Which is surprising on a couple of levels in terms of, there's been plenty of data that's come out to show that Starlink doesn't necessarily have the capacity to meet the requirements. But also Amazon's LEO program doesn't exist yet. Technically, it's not commercially available. So how are these states?
It doesn't exist.
Right.
But SpaceX, it's interesting, in August did launch a bunch of Kuiper satellites. So that antitrust issue appears to have been resolved. But look, here's to me, it's on the internet, we talk about one neat little trick, right? And what NTIA did, and it's gotten almost no publicity, but they did this one neat little trick, which is to say, for purposes of determining on the map whether a location is unserved or underserved, which qualifies them to get BEAD support,
right,
satellite does not count.
Right.
On the other hand, for purposes of meeting the grant money, satellite counts. And you would say to yourself, how can that be? How can it? It's like Schrodinger's cat, or however that's pronounced. It both exists and doesn't exist at the same time. And of course, there's a very simple reason for this, which is if you say satellite really is broadband, and therefore, if it can serve a location, that location is served. If you say that, you return all $42 billion.
Right.
But you also say to all those Republican governors and rural areas, sorry,
Yeah.
It's,
okay.
So they couldn't do that. So they had to pull that one little neat accounting trick, and congratulations, they pulled it off.
Okay. And just a little bit about the wireline providers for a moment, the big guys that you guys focus on over at New Street. It looks like Comcast and AT&T have come out, on top in terms of the wireline providers, but we also haven't seen results from states where Charter has a significant presence, like California, Texas, New York.
Yeah, no, look, I think one of the things, we certainly have a good grasp of directionally where it's going.
Yeah.
But I think it's California, New York, Texas, Illinois. Those are big states, right?
Yeah.
And
Florida.
So final results still to be determined. One of the things that was interesting to me, and it's just so classic, they issued the new rules on June 6th and gave the states 90 days. This, when you say to states working in governments, you have 90 days to do what really most people would say should take 180, even 9 months to rerun everything and redo the mapping and all this. And you do it in the summer.
Right.
After you spent 137 days doing what's actually relatively easy, which is to rewrite the rules.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think we would refer to that. The technical term for that is that's a dick move, but they did it, and they'll claim victory, and they'll get away with it.
Oh man, I'm so glad I invited you on today.
No, and I want to be clear. I'm
Yeah,
not saying that all the rule changes were wrong.
I
I'm
understand.
saying that when you take that much time
Hmm.
and then you give people very little time over the summer.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
True
And
story. When I was talking to people, I was going to be chief of staff. I really didn't know much about the FCC.
yeah.
And one staff member told me, this is the most important thing I'm going to tell you. The August meeting, first week of August, the September meeting, last week of September. That's the most important thing. And I said, well, that fair enough. By the way, many things have changed since 1993.
Sure.
When was Brendan Carr's August meeting? First week of August. When is the September meeting? Last week of September. That did not change. NTIA, however, did not honor that principle in terms of dealing with the states. But what can you say?
No, unfortunately not. Although I do remember the prior NTIA also ruining the summer, I think, in terms of the schedule of when BEAD stuff was
Yeah, but
due.
they didn't ruin just the summer. They ruined a lot more than just the summer.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. So speaking of the NTIA and its arbitrary day approval days that it sets, it has now assigned itself 90 days to approve the proposals it's received. So what are you expecting during this 90-day period, both in terms of what pushback we might see from the NTIA and whether you're expecting some rumblings in the industry or from the states with regard to like lawsuits or any legal challenges to the new version of BEAD?
Yeah. So, number one, there's a big question, which we'll get to, I'm sure, which is to the extent that states have money left over after deployment, does that money go back to NTIA? Does it go to the U.S. Treasury? Can they use it? We can talk about that. But in this 90-day review period, I would say a few things. Number one, there may be lawsuits. I'm always hesitate to judge a lawsuit before I've read the complaint, but I can say pretty clearly that lawsuit's going to lose.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is because the law has a very not bizarre, it has a almost unique thing that says basically you can't sue under normal Administrative Procedure Act kind of issues. You can only sue if you believe that there has been corruption, or I can't remember the other terms, but it's whatever I think of the policy. I don't believe, Howard Lutnick is being paid off by anybody in a way that causes one to be able to challenge it under the law.
Got it. Okay.
So I don't expect lawsuits. I do expect that in almost every case, the NTIA will try to tweak it because I think Lutnick will pride himself on, I pushed hard, I got 13 billion, and now I'm going to get another. It's just like, I just think that's the culture that he's infusing in NTIA. And, the big question mark will be in those areas where you have a individual cost higher than what some people might consider reasonable. Do they basically say that has to go to satellite too?
Right.
One of the interesting things is the highest cost locations, I think this is right, are in tribal areas. And I think the politics of tribes are complicated.
Yeah.
And tribes exist in swing states, frankly, Arizona and Nevada. And you might include New Mexico too. And, you have tribal governance issues. You have a bunch of different things. And I just wonder whether NTIA will say, we'll force other people to go down, but we're not going to force tribes to go down because it's complicated and difficult. But I expect that will probably be most of what NTIA says. I think that NTIA is probably comfortable where most states came in terms of the range, but they just feel the need to modify everything a little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
But to make a clear point about it, after the Louisiana and the Virginia plans came in, SpaceX wrote, shall we say, very nasty letters.
Yeah.
basically saying it was all wrong and they should have given a lot more to satellite and blah, blah, blah. Number one, there is no law that requires anybody to consider those facts. That may be wrong, but the way the law works, it doesn't require either NTIA or the states to address those issues.
Mm-hmm.
So I think in terms of political pressure, Musk has probably got as much as he can get from Lutnick. He may get a little bit more, but it won't be order of magnitude more. And then secondly, the FCC, and this is new as of this morning, was enormously helpful to Musk in, shall we say, providing logical arguments for Charlie Ergen to sell Musk a lot of spectrum that Musk really wanted. So,
Yeah.
So I think Musk has gotten the benefit of the bargain.
Someone did, and it's Elon Musk. Just curious on the Elon Musk factor, whether or not you think it's surprising that he still ended up with a fair amount of this business despite it coming after the falling out.
I think the falling out has been misunderstood.
Okay.
He certainly is no longer the favorite son as he was in the first 90 days of the administration. But the Republicans are doing making a very concerted effort to keep him in the tent.
Mm-hmm.
He, though critical of Trump, has now abandoned all efforts to fund anyone who's opposed to the One Big Beautiful Bill, which he regarded as a disaster, but apparently not that much of a disaster.
Right.
And so I think there's an effort to keep him in the tent, but also an effort to say, you work for us, not we work for you, kind of thing.
Right.
Okay. You catch my drift. So
yeah, got it.
But he definitely got a lot more. One of the things that's so interesting to me is he got a lot in states where where SpaceX did not bid at all in the first round, almost as if he knew there was going to be another round. Imagine that.
Huh. Interesting. Let me take us on a tangent for an hour and talk about that a little bit now. Yeah. So on the non-deployment funds piece of this. So the original BEAD, as I mentioned at the top, was called Broadband Equity, Access and Deployment. And that equity piece was going to come in a few different ways, most of which have been stripped from the program. But one of those ways was the use of non-deployment funds for things like digital literacy programs and various efforts to help people actually access and use the internet safely and successfully. It seems completely unclear if there's going to be any use of non-deployment funds. I don't think the NTIA has put out any guidance yet in terms of the use of those funds. There was a group that put out a report a month or two ago that picked something out from an NTIA statement and said, look, you're going to get to use the non-deployment funds. So you should spend as few deployment funds as possible and save all that money for non-deployment. I think that was sort of wishful thinking, perhaps on their part. I don't think it's clear at all what the non-deployment funds are going to go towards. So I just want to know, first of all, do you have any sense of where the NTIA is going to come down on the use of non-deployment funds? And what happens if the states can't use those non-deployment funds to the overall goal of the BEAD program?
So I think NTIA's current view is that all non-deployment funds should be returned to the Treasury, allowing Lutnick to have a press conference with the president in which he says, here's a check for $22 billion because you're so great at saving money. Let's put aside what's happening to the national debt right now. Let's put aside the rise in interest rate. Let's put aside that money, I think
the entire economy,
sure. I don't know, 2 days, of interest payments, whatever. And my math might be wrong on that one. What I believe NTIA wants to do is collect all the money. They have a couple of problems. Number one, that's not what the law says.
That's right.
And on that one, I believe the states could sue if he does that. It's an interesting legal question, but they would have a colorable claim because it's not about whether an award is justified. It's whether you can take back the money, given that the law says any funds, once you've connected all unserved and underserved areas, you can use it for these other purposes.
Yeah.
So that's what I think Lutnick wants to do. His problem is that there's not a single state that wants that. Mm-hmm. It turns out that a lot of states are run by Republicans. Mm-hmm. And I believe there will be efforts, particularly among Republican governors, and we could speculate on which ones will be in leadership of this, to make an argument that, essentially is, you've done a great job. We've really squeezed and negotiated and we've saved lots of money. But the money is ours that we saved.
Mm-hmm.
And it's perfectly appropriate for you to clarify what we can spend money on, but the money is ours. And I believe where the states would go, and I'm making a political prediction.
Sure.
I don't have any real knowledge. That will all be saying, they'll basically be saying, we're going to use it for AI. We're going to make it so that we can fulfill the vision and the details of the president's really great, terrific AI plan, a 28-page document that came out a couple months ago. And so whether it be fiber to data centers or workforce development or other things, it's all about AI.
Okay.
Now, what the difference is between what the states are going to spend it on and what they would have spent it on it differently by just putting AI on top of it, you could argue about it. But I think that's what the approach will be. And I don't know how that resolves.
Okay.
There is a political benefit to returning money that, in my opinion, lasts maybe 12 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Which is to say less than Andy Warhol's 15 minutes. There's a political benefit. It is, the most unsurprising thing ever was the New York Times article talking about how Trump is taking credit for all the things that are coming out of the infrastructure bill.
Right.
That, of course, he attacked and all the Republicans, or most Republicans voted against. To have the states continue to do AI projects which allow Trump and Lutnick and the governors, it seems to me the political benefit is greater there. But I don't know. And Lutnick may have a very different point of view on this, and he may really just want the money back. So that's an interesting battle to want. From a sector perspective, there's no question but that the sector is better off if the money is spent as the governors want to spend it on AI-related things. We no longer call it digital equity. We call it something else. Yeah. We call it AI readiness.
Right.
The Venn diagram is significant in its overlap.
Got it. Okay. And how long do you think this can drag out for, the non-deployment piece of this?
It can drag out for a while, but it has to end by the time all the state plans have been approved.
Okay. All right. Okay. So
roughly speaking, by the end of the year. I expect it to be decided earlier, but I don't know.
Okay. I wasn't sure if they could just drag it out for, as long as the states are in the process of spending the money. So that's helpful to know that they do need to.
I think, for one thing, the states have to decide whether to continue to have broadband offices. And if they lose all the money, they just shut down everything. And if they don't, then you have a broadband office that determines how to spend the money on AI in an individual state.
Got it. Okay, so let's round things out with the main theme of this podcast, which is the digital divide. You and I have been talking about this BEAD program since before it was BEAD. I think you and were talking about it as the Lewis Latimer plan at the time. There were a lot of ideas from that plan became part of BEAD, and now BEAD is a bit different. But so overall, short term and long term, how does this version of BEAD impact the digital divide? And, back during the Biden administration, there was a saying that BEAD without equity is bad. So is BEAD bad now? Can it succeed without, the previous parameters, funds for non-deployment, without an affordable connectivity program, and with the future of the Universal Service Fund sort of up in the air? How are we actually making progress on the digital divide with this program?
So I will make a prediction, of which I have a high level of confidence, that sometime this year, Howard Lutnick and President Trump will declare mission accomplished. Not sure they'll use that phrase, but they will say, people have been talking about the digital divide for decades, and we solved it in less than a year. Put aside the historical inaccuracy of that. There's a conceptual problem that's more difficult for me, which is they will define the digital divide as only including one of three divides. The first divide, and in a way the most important, is the access divide. Can everybody have access to a broadband pipe?
Mm-hmm.
And the truth is, by the time we're done with BEAD, the answer will be yes. Actually, if you agree that satellite is broadband, then you would say we've already accomplished it.
Yeah.
So they will declare mission accomplished for something that was already done. And one of the interesting things by this, states did give satellites lots of locations, but I think every state is wondering, what do we get from that? Like what is offered to our customer or our residents that is different tomorrow than it was today? And the answer is capacity and free equipment. I think both of those things are highly questionable. We could talk about that if you want, but it doesn't important. The important thing is the access divide. That part of the digital divide will be solved. It would have been solved anyway. I personally think that doing more with wireline is better, but that's a really valid public policy argument. Trade-offs, costs, benefits,
Sure.
etc. And the reason I say that is you look at a 30 to 50 year perspective, and then secondly, an individual house, it probably doesn't matter that much, but for a community, laying the foundation that improves 5G, that scales as we have AI more, but also for the institutions, for the small businesses, for the hospital, etc. Having a wireline is more important. Anyway, but that they'll make that argument, and Republicans will agree because Republicans have to agree with that. But there are two other divides. One is what I think of as the affordability and usability divide. That is to say, do people have the money to pay for it and the skills personally to use it? We're still going to be way behind. And in fact, my friend, and I think the smartest guy in terms of low income use of broadband, John Horgan, who worked with me on the National Broadband Plan, did a study which projected that as a result of the One Beautiful Bill and the loss of social safety net things, payments, we're going to lose, I think, 5.6 million folks because they will no longer be able to afford it because they're going to have to spend money on food, SNAP being reduced, etc. So that digital divide actually not only is not solved, it probably gets worse.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, that's the most important one because the important thing is to connect people, not real estate.
Yeah.
Of course, you can't connect people without connecting real estate. So it's, but the point is there is no activity designed to address that divide, not in Congress, not at the FCC, a little bit in states, though that has been slowed down because NTIA said if a state does anything to help low income people, in terms of what we think of as price regulation,
that's right. Yeah.
we won't give you your BEAD money. The states say, well, we'll just wait and we'll see what happens next year.
Yeah.
The third digital divide is what I think of as the utilization divide, which is, are we using broadband to improve outcomes and lower costs, particularly in education and healthcare, but also in public safety, job training, job placement, 1,000 other things. We did this in the Latimer Plan. We did this in the National Broadband Plan. I think the United States is still well behind. I was naively hopeful that the DOGE effort would lead to that. It hasn't at all.
Right.
It is hard to see. First of all, I think DOGE will end up costing taxpayers money, not saving any money.
Yep.
But, if what they did, and I wrote about this with a friend in the Wall Street Journal, was close thousands of offices, Social Security, Department of Labor, Veterans Affairs, but replaced it with really great 24/7, 365 customer service, but also use some of the savings to make sure everybody was connected, that would be closing that very important divide.
Yeah.
There is no... It's funny. I mean, they basically got rid of the Digital Services Corps and they brought in one guy to make government websites better, which is great. But why did you fire everybody who was in the business of doing that?
Right. Yeah.
So I think on the second and third digital divides, we still have a long ways to go. And this brings up universal service.
Yes.
There is a working group in Congress that I believe is working in good faith to reform universal service. The contribution factor, I think, in the next quarter will, for the first time, go above 40%. But I see no sense of urgency by either the Congress or the FCC to reform universal service.
Well, this working group you mentioned has been working as a group for years at this point.
That's correct. Okay. That is absolutely correct. And I think they're sincerely interested in it. But, in the first Trump term, there really was only one bill that passed.
Right.
And that was a tax cut.
Right.
I think the same will be true for this. So, and I think, a few years ago, it seemed like all the Republicans agreed that we should tax tech for universal service. I'm not sure that's true anymore, in part because I think tech has largely shifted sides. So there's a lot more tech among Republicans.
Yeah.
But here's the big thing that I would just note. I have been, shall we say, snidely critical of Republicans on this podcast. I am snidely critical of everybody.
Fair enough.
I'm very bipartisan in that. And I will be snidely critical of the former Democratic chair, who was told by Congress to write a plan or to inform Congress about what universal service should look like after BEAD.
Yes.
So not just contribution reform, but distribution reform.
Yeah.
The FCC staff is capable of doing very good work. She did not demand it of them. And that report was obsolete almost the day it was published. Nothing has happened in terms of proceedings, in terms of economic analysis. In a way, it ought to be simpler because the biggest part of USF is the high cost program.
Yeah. Which
we refer to as the Connect America Fund, or we refer to as RDOF, whatever. That should be significantly less. So we probably need less money. But I'm not sure, because the affordability issue is a big issue.
Right.
And the institutional issues of schools and libraries, that is still a big issue, and in a way with AI even bigger.
Yeah.
But there's no government analysis of the problem that I would say helps map where we need to go.
All right. So the moral of the story is we're mad at everybody, and there's a lot for us to keep track of.
Well, we should either be amused by everybody or, but look, nobody ever solves every problem or 100% of any problem. So we shouldn't hold them to that standard. The question is, are we making progress? And I think the real moral of the story is the digital divide is not one thing. Right. It is several things. This administration is going to focus on one thing, and I think we're going to fall short on the other two.
Yeah, I think that's what the disappointing thing about the outcome of BEAD at this point is that the original program was trying to address all of the aspects of the digital divide and uplift communities in the process. And it struck me as a very aspirational type of policy. And, now we're stripping it for parts. But anyway, it's been such a pleasure to get to talk with you about this. We really appreciate all of your insights and the time that you give us here at Light Reading and across the media, really. We don't know how you do it, but we're grateful. And we look forward to catching up with you again on all of this soon.
Thank you very much, Nicole. Really enjoy your work as well, and everybody at Light Reading. And thanks for having me on.
Anytime. Thank you again, Blair, for joining me. Thank you as well to Pierre Landriau for editing this episode. Be sure to subscribe to the Light Reading podcast for more episodes of The Divide, as well as interviews and insights from the Light Reading team. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.